A couple of key players that we were looking forward to returning to the Reds may not be coming back as soon as we hoped.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I'm glad that you're alongside me today. I have loved the Reds since birth. Seriously, I've got the baby pictures to prove it, and this is my 6th season now hosting this podcast, either as a solo host or as a co-host. Today I'm solo. Steve is not with me. He'll return tomorrow. His work schedule kind of didn't jive with us today, but hey, look, here on the Locked On Reds podcast, we try to make this podcast for everybody. We try to be positive about the Cincinnati Reds because, quite frankly, that's the road less traveled these days. And every day, we'll discuss the big thing that's on every Reds fan's mind. We'll dive into some geeky numbers and things like that, and generally overreact to the everyday movements of the marathon of the 162-game MLB regular season. Glad you're here with me today. Locked On Reds is, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day. And on today's podcast, we will dive into Nick Lodolo and what is the biggest difference in his game so far this year. The reason why he has had so much success. He's on the mound coming up later tonight against the Cleveland Guardians. We're also going to talk about the recent slump that Elly De La Cruz is in and why he shouldn't be worried about it. We'll have some positive spins on that one because there's plenty of reasons to be positive about the man, Elly De La Cruz. But I want to start first with some discouraging injury news on a couple of players and one positive note about a player who is returning here soon. That's all on today's Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by eBay Motors. From brakes to exhaust kits and beyond, eBay Motors has over 122 million parts to keep your ride or die alive. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. The Reds got some not-so-great news about Christian Encarnacion-Strand and Brandon Williamson, and this comes on the heels of a couple of days ago when they got good news about CES. I mean, he was cleared by team doctors to begin a rehab stint. He sought a second opinion from a hand specialist. That hand specialist told him to rest another 5 days. Well, on Tuesday, David Bell said something interesting. And I don't have the clip, but I do have the quote. David Bell said, quote, "There has been some ligament damage all along. That's the issue. There's a chance he plays and never has to have surgery. There's also a chance he could play and then have surgery at the end of the season. And of course, there's also a chance that he has surgery now and misses the rest of the season." I think that whenever we mentioned this on the podcast the other day, whenever we mentioned that the doctors had cleared him to begin his rehab stint, Steve jokingly meant, "Oh, so you mean he's going to have season-ending surgery?" Well, that's not that far off. What are we doing here? This medical staff, every time we turn around, the only guy that they seem to be right about is TJ Friedl, and even that, they're a little bit too conservative on his timelines. He comes back early. Everybody else, it's like, hey, they're ready to play. They're out for a month. And Brandon Williamson had begun his rehab stint in Triple-A, was pulled because even though he was pitching well, he was feeling discomfort in his shoulder. He has found out through a shoulder specialist in Arizona that he has a Bennett lesion in his shoulder. Mostly, he's looking at all options to figure this one out, but it's likely that will require surgery. That will sideline him for the rest of the year. And when you talk about pitchers and shoulder recoveries and things like that, that's a scary road to be going down. Maybe this is something, and I don't know that much about this sort of injury, but maybe this is something he can work around. But as of right now, it sounds like Brandon Williamson is not in the plans for this year. And quite frankly, these two not so great updates came down the wire, and the Reds should be as conservative with both of these as possible. We hear a lot about this, and you know, this was the news that kind of trumped the day for me. I know that the Reds lost to the Cleveland Guardians 5-3. That game never really was a game that I was going to overreact to. It felt like the Reds had a chance to blow the doors off the thing in the very first inning, and then the Guardians center fielder Tyler Freeman made two just absolutely fantastic catches up against the wall, both of them robbing extra bases guaranteed. One of them looked like it was a home run. We're probably talking about 3 runs that Tyler Freeman saved the Cleveland Guardians last night, and then the Guardians took advantage of their opportunities, and that was the game. So I'm not going to react over too much on that. Nick Martinez wasn't great, kind of messed up the bullpen day when he wasn't great, and that's kind of the end of that. But the big news for me was these injury updates, because while I wouldn't say that I've earmarked the possible return for CES as the day that the lineup gets right, Christian Encarnacion-Strand has been playing hurt all year. And David Bell even said it. There's been some ligament damage all along. The thing for me was the initial reporting was he was hit on the hand. And, in the x-ray, we found a fracture, but that fracture's healed, so we're going to wait for the swelling to go down, then we're going to double check. Well, the swelling went down. He's got another fracture. All right, we're putting him on the injury list because of the fracture. Fracture. That was all we heard. And now we're hearing there's been ligament damage all along? It's kind of, it's a little bit annoying to hear these things where it's like, okay, we give you a timeline, and then whenever the player doesn't meet that timeline, well, yeah, there was a factor that we didn't tell you about that's going to keep him out for much longer. CES is a guy that we had penciled in as a one of the biggest chances to be the best bat in this Reds lineup. He has a talented bat. He is a good hitter. Has a ceiling to be a very good hitter if he can hit his potential. And the fact that he was struggling before hitting the injured list, I think he was working through some injuries and things like that. This is kind of like the whole thing with Tyler Stevenson, where Tyler Stevenson may have been healthy last year, but he was still working through some stuff. It's clear that whatever CES had with this healed fracture in his wrist, he was working through that, because he would have good games and then he'd have a lot of bad games. But I think that had we gotten healthy CES back, you could say, boy, this lineup has a real good shot, and this team has a real good shot to go on some sort of run whenever they get these guys healthy. They went on a little bit of a run whenever they got TJ Friedl back. You can envision them going on a run whenever Noelvi Marte returns, which, by the way, that's the positive update. He played his first game in Triple-A yesterday, first game of the season, getting ready for his inevitable return from suspension for the performance-enhancing drugs. He was 2 for 5, had a single and a double, looking pretty good. Remember, when he comes back to the major leagues, he will be continuing a 16-game hitting streak that he ended last year with. And the whole, his press conference the other day where he said, I don't know, to how did this all happen? That's put that to the side. I definitely found that very questionable, but he is working his way back. The lineup will get stronger with him, but the lineup could be stronger still with CES. And this health update, not necessarily the most exciting thing, but it's clear to me that the Reds need to be conservative with this. If he needs surgery, have surgery. Come back healthy next year, because he has a long career ahead of him that many scouts predict to be a very productive career. Don't jeopardize that so that you can come back and play, at whatever, 60%, 70% health this year, because I don't necessarily know that that's as big a help as we want it to be. And with Noelvi Marte coming back, Jeimer Candelario has looked great at the plate, and he's made some good plays at first base. Spencer Steer has looked pretty good at first base, and we know what he brings to the lineup each and every day. The Reds can weather the storm without CES, with those guys in tow. So if he needs surgery, get the surgery. Be conservative with it. And it sounds like we might not see Brandon Williamson at all this year, and that's a bummer, but get healthy. That should be the goal. You know, here recently, it feels as though we haven't seen a whole lot of Elly De La Cruz going ham on a baseball field. Should we be concerned about that? I'll tell you why I'm not concerned about it coming up next. Here on Locked On Reds, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest news about the Reds, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, the playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for your unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that big parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. Again, that's tnusa.com/lockedon. For more information on TaxNet USA, see the link in the episode description below. Baseball season is moving right along, and you can make some cash on Elly De La Cruz performances over on Prize Picks. Whether it's stolen bases, homers, or hits, take your pick of more or less on Elly and add them to your Prize Picks entry today. With how well Elly's been playing baseball this season, you can turn $10 into $100 with just a few taps. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. They have quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and they have an enormous selection of players and stat types, and it makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So get on the action with Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for a deposit match of up to $100 for your first deposit. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy. You've got to check out Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team, every day. And speaking of every day, shout out to our everydayers out there. Appreciate you all joining in on today's Locked On Reds podcast. For our everydayers, coming up on the next show, we are going to be looking back at the Ohio Cup with our friends from Locked On Guardians as we break down these first two games. Never understand the 2-game series. I joked about this. I got the chance to be on and host Cincy 360 on ESPN 1530 yesterday. And Steve was on for a segment with me, and I was saying, well, you know, a 3-game sweep is a sweep, a 4-game sweep is a mop. What's a 2-game sweep? Is that a dusting? 2-game series. I don't get them. But the Reds have a chance here tonight to even this 2-game set with Nick Lodolo on the mound. I find it interesting because so the Reds would need to win this game, and then they play 2 in Cleveland, but that's not till September. This is a long gap in between these two sets of 2 games. But if the Reds win the next 3 games, then they win the Ohio Cup. Be the first time in a while that they've done that. The Guardians have held on to the Cup. The last team to actually win the Ohio Cup was in 2020 when the Guardians took a 4-game set, 3-1. Ever since then, they've split the season series. Kind of feels like that's what they're working toward in this year's Ohio Cup. But something that I noticed yesterday, because somebody who's not been a big part, and quite frankly, I've picked out a sample size because I was curious as to how far back this goes. Elly De La Cruz has had a bit of a slump here over the last 2+ weeks. You don't play 14 games in 14 days, usually, and that's not what the Reds have done. But in the last 14 games, Elly has not hit. He's gotten on base a little bit, and he's not stolen bases. He's been very un-Elly-like, despite the fact that in these 14 games, the Reds are 10-4. But in these 14 games, Elly is slashing 179 on the batting average, 270 on his on-base, and 304 for his slugging percentage. He has 18 strikeouts to 6 walks during this period, and he has just 3 steals. My Elly parlay is dying on the vine here. But it's not something that I'm going too crazy about, because Elly is having just an amazing season so far. This is a slump in the middle of it. Everybody goes through dry spells during the year. I mean, even Mookie Betts, and Mookie Betts' dry spells are much different from most people because he's an amazing player, but even Mookie Betts goes through dry spells. That's where we are with Elly De La Cruz. And part of the reason for this huge dip, we talk about Elly being a high batting average on balls in play type of player. He's always going to be a guy that when things are going well, or when things are even going average for him, he's still got a higher than league average BABIP. Right now, he's below league average by about 70 points. His BABIP is at 222. League average is around 299. So that's something that I look at and say, okay, well, that ebbs and flows. And as that ebbs, so does his performances. It's going to come back up here soon. He still has over 2 wins above replacement, whether you look at Fangraphs or Baseball Reference's calculations. At this point in the season, he still has almost as many home runs in 66 games as he had in 98 games last year. And he is doing a much better job of not chasing pitches this year. In fact, he's done a fantastic job at keeping the chase rate down. The strikeout rate hasn't been phenomenally affected. It's not great. He's still in the bottom 10% of the league, but it's better than it was last year. So there is progress being made. The two things that give me a little bit of pause during this slump is he has a 46%, and this is during the season, not just during the slump, but during the season, he swings and misses 46% of the time on breaking balls. And it's not because he's chasing bad breaking balls out of the zone. It's just whenever he doesn't quite seem to have it barreled up just yet. He hasn't been able to quite read the break on those. So that's where you see that whiff rate. And then the other thing that gives me a little bit of pause is that earlier on this season, in April and into May, he had an average exit velocity, his quality of contact, of 93 miles an hour. That's now dropped on the season to 89. It's dropped 4 miles an hour in a little over a month's time. So that means that he's really kind of been making some weak contact here recently. And that shows on his stats. He only has a couple of home runs, a couple of extra base hits. Really, the damage that he has done has been singles or walks, and he gets brought around to score. That's been his damage when he does it in this last 14 games. He's not been doing a lot of it. But consider this, because I think this is crazy. And it's a reminder that slumps in baseball don't define a player. The peaks and the valleys of a baseball season are many. And so when you're in one, you got to realize that the next one's coming. But while he's in this valley, consider this. He is still, based on what he has put together so far this year, he is still on pace to hit 27 home runs and get 83 steals. And if you think that that's rare, you're right. Because the only two guys, when you look back in the history of baseball, that have those types of numbers, they both happened in 1986, by the way. This is kind of funny how this cross-section happens here. But Rickey Henderson and Eric Davis, pre-injuries Eric Davis, are the only two players that ever had any sort of season where they stole more than 80 bases and hit more than 25 home runs. The rarity of a season like that. And I get it, that's on pace numbers. He hasn't done that. He has to do that. He still has something to do, still has some things to work on to get to those numbers. But that's how good he has been, despite the numbers that some may look at. Because people will be like, oh, well, he's only hitting 230 something, and he's still got how many strikeouts? He's got to be my favorite player to talk about ever. Because he is the perfect example of how we can change, or not, how we can isolate statistics and make a guy sound really good or really bad. Because if you tell me, and you do the whole blind comparison thing that I love to do with different players, and you say, I'll give you player X, he's batting 230, he strikes out 31% of the time, and that's your guy. And you're like, well, I don't like that guy. Like, okay, well, now I'll give you this guy. He's got 11 home runs in 66 games. He's got 33 steals. He's got a pretty decent on-base percentage. Yeah, I'm taking that guy. It's the same guy. It's Elly De La Cruz. He's going to be the funnest guy to talk about as he is getting to his prime, as he is getting to the point when he is going to be so consistently good that we talk about him as one of the best players in this league. And that's not just me saying it. That's not just Steve saying it. There have been national writers. There have been national scouts. There have been pundits who have talked about baseball for years and years and years. They watch Elly De La Cruz and they know how good he can be. And as smart as he is with the game of baseball, he definitely can get there. Coming up tonight, Nick Lodolo is pitching for the Reds as they face off with the Guardians for one more game before they have an off day and then travel to Milwaukee. What has been the biggest development in Nick Lodolo's game this year? I'll tell you what it is coming up next. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. Those are just a few of the things that eBay Motors has to offer because there are so many parts. They have over 122 million parts. And whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. They can help you keep your number one ride or die alive because you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that big win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. You can catch every pitch of the Reds' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM. Just download the SXM app and search the word Reds. Also, bookmark si.com/MLB/Reds or CincinnatiRedsTalk.com if you want to type in an easier URL for some written content about your Cincinnati Reds. I'm writing over there. Steve's writing over there. James Rapine, Austin Elmore, Rick Uccino, a lot of great folks writing about the Reds at CincinnatiRedsTalk.com. The biggest development for Nick Lodolo this season is that he's no longer a two-pitch guy. In years past, it's been fastball, breaking ball. Fastball, back foot breaker. If it's working well, it's a back foot breaker. If it's not, it's kind of all over the place. But it's been fastball, breaking ball. He's added a changeup this year. And the changeup isn't just another offering. He's actually getting some swings and misses on it. In fact, he has thrown the changeup 5% of the time more than he did last year. And he is getting a swing and a miss every third time he throws it. So 33% of the time that he throws his changeup, guys are swinging right through it. That's to go along with the fact that hitters swing and miss on 44% of the curveballs that he throws. He has really got some good swing and miss stuff here with his breaking ball and his changeup, and his fastball has been pretty good about missing barrels. The other thing for me, and when you look at Nick Lodolo this year, obviously the first reason as to why he is so much better is the fact that he's healthy. But the changeup, and then the fact that he is limiting walks. He's cut down on walks because he has thrown over 52% of his pitches in the strike zone. He's filling up the zone, man. And that is putting a lot of pressures on opposing hitters. He's been fantastic with that, and that's one of the biggest reasons why he has limited whatever damage he gives up, because every so often, he'll give up a hit or something like that. No pitcher is perfect all the time. And every so often he might give up a big fly. In fact, there's one statistic that I looked at, and I kind of looked at a little bit sideways, because this year the ratio of fly balls that turn into home runs is much lower this year than it has been for him in years past. So that could tick up slightly, because his career average is right around 15%. Of course, his career average, saying that like it's a long time. First 2 years of his career, the average home run to fly ball ratio for him is about 15%. This year, it's at 9%. So that could tick up a bit. But if he's not walking guys and he's not giving up a ton of hits, so there's not a ton of guys on base when he gives up those home runs, then it's not going to be that big of a problem. Because the best kind of home run for a pitcher to allow is a solo home run. Obviously, you say, well, the best kind of home run to allow is no home run. But if you're going to give up a home run, make sure nobody's on base. Because when you pitch in Great American Ballpark, you're going to give up a home run every so often. And he's keeping the ball on the ground only about 41% of the time. That needs to tick up a bit, especially for a guy that throws a good breaking ball like Nick Lodolo does. And if he can work in the changeup and become kind of a, as much as it misses bats, definitely miss barrels type of pitch, I think that's going to be interesting. His batting average on balls in play is a little bit, it's kind of pointing to him getting a little bit lucky, but it's not by a wide margin. League average, like I mentioned earlier with Elly, league average is 299. The BABIP against Nick Lodolo is 263. So that could tick up a little bit. But again, what that tick up looks like is not as if it's going to blow everything up. The numbers that surround his ERA, currently below 3, the numbers that surround that all say that it's lucky, but it's not super lucky. Like his xFIP is like 3.3. I think his expected ERA is 3.1. You'll take those all day, every day, and twice on Sunday, quite frankly. So he's been so good this year, and probably the biggest factor has been the advent of the changeup, but not to be outdone, it has been his command of the strike zone. The fact that he fills it up, he limits the walks, limits the base runners, so that if there is a hit, it's not bringing him around to score. It's just getting guys on base to begin with, and then he can strand them there. He's been good so far this season. Hopefully he continues it here today. Want to see the Reds get back and get a win. The 5-3 loss last night was frustrating. I know I haven't talked about it much, and I mentioned it earlier on in the podcast where I was like, the analysis of this game was just Cleveland had it, the Reds didn't. The Reds had their chances. They didn't capitalize. The Guardians had their chances, and they did capitalize. That was that. There was no real egregious error. People wanted to harp on the bullpen day, but I saw the merit in it. It's kind of worked for the Reds, albeit in tiny sample size. It's not as if you can really know something with just a couple of games into a season, but they've looked better this year. That all hinges on whether Nick Martinez has his stuff. He didn't have his stuff on Tuesday. And when Nick Martinez doesn't have his stuff, bullpen days look like they did last year, where you just dump all your Legos onto the floor and you're like, all right, what are we going to do with all this? That's what a bullpen day looked like for the Reds in 2023. Hopefully, we don't get too many more of those moving forward. But looking forward to watching Nick Lodolo pitch tonight. We're going to break down that performance and more. Going to get the Locked On Guardians perspective. We'll probably talk a little bit about the draft as well, with the Guardians going 1 and the Reds going number 2. And Jeff Ellis, one half of our Locked On Guardians show, is a big MLB draft expert, so he knows what he's talking about when it comes to that. So we're definitely going to get them on here and break down that series coming up tomorrow. We'll also get you set coming up a little bit later on this week for the Milwaukee series. Huge series, huge opportunity for the Reds as they have climbed back into this race. Quite frankly, they were never that far from the Brewers, despite the fact that they were playing horribly. But they've got a chance to make some hay this weekend. And we'll talk to Chuck Freeman from Locked On Brewers about what on earth the Brewers are doing and how is this sustainable. We just want to ask him that. Like, dude, what gives? That's all coming up on the next Locked On Reds podcast. Make sure that you become an everydayer by subscribing on your favorite platform. Make sure you follow us here on YouTube if you're watching here. Thank you so much for doing so. Appreciate everybody that makes the show part of your day, because we will always be here talking Reds, because we are Locked On Reds every single day.